Welcome to episode 296 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to, once again, retired agent Kyle Vowinkel, who served in the FBI for 24 years. In this episode, Kyle reviews how he, as a member of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit, CNU, negotiated the peaceful surrender of one of the Boston Marathon bombers. It is a powerful first-hand insider's perspective on the capture of a violent domestic terrorist responsible, along with his older brother, for killing 3 and injuring 281 others. The bombings took place on April 15th, 2013. While a member of CNU, Kyle not only convinced a terrorist to surrender, but he also negotiated with kidnappers and pirates. Before his CNU assignment, Kyle served for 8 years on the FBI's Elite Hostage Rescue Team, HRT, and as a tactical operator on HRT, he deployed on hundreds of high-risk missions domestically as well as overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. During his bureau career, Kyle has had assignments in over 20 countries, including China, Qatar, Kenya, South Korea, and Peru. After serving on HRT and the CNU, he used his leadership experiences as a supervisor in multiple field offices and retired as Assistant Special Agent in Charge, ASAC, in the Miami Division. Currently, Kyle is a keynote inspirational speaker at events around the world for companies and institutions such as West Point, Cornell University, Google, California Association of Tactical Officers, Baltimore Hostage Negotiation Seminar, and at FBI National Academy events. In the fall of 2024, Kyle plans to publish a book to share stories from his amazing FBI career. You can contact Kyle via his website, Apex Consulting. Before we get to the case review, I want to remind members of my reader team to check their inboxes for my September email about the FBI and books, TV, and movies. I review the 2023 movie, Reality, now streaming on Max, and share some exciting personal news about being featured in Writer's Digest magazine. Talking about personal news, I will be traveling to Brazil and Argentina in October. So if you live in Rio de Janeiro or Buenos Aires and would like to meet up with me, please email me at jerrywilliamsauthor@gmail.com and let's see if we can make that happen. And don't forget, if you're going to CrimeCon later this month, I'll see you there. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to jerrywilliams.com and the show notes for this episode, and links to where you can join my reader team, which is all about crime fiction, buy me a cup of coffee, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Kyle Vowinkel, back again. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, Jerry. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So when we were talking the last time you were on, which was episode 280, when you talked about negotiations at the Alabama boy in the bunker case, you also told me about your role as a negotiator during the Boston Marathon manhunt. So thanks for coming back.
It's great to be here, and this is the 10-year anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombing. There's been Netflix series and Paramounts, but I haven't spoken to any of those. And none of the key, really, people on the ground during the capture and during the negotiations have. For those interested in that incredible history, this is a first-hand perspective. It's very rarely, only the second time I've shared this story. Hopefully your listeners get a lot out of this.
Yeah, I am sure they will. I've covered the Boston Marathon 2 times before. On episode 250, I had Rick Deloria, who was actually the special agent in charge of the Boston division at the time of the Boston Marathon. And he gave an overview from the very beginning when the bomb went off until the very end when the trial and the sentencings occurred. And then I did episode 247 with Michael De La Pena, who was the polygraph examiner in the Boston division. And he did a polygraph examination of one of the brothers' associates. And we have a great time talking about what he did to get that information out that they needed. And also just what it's like to be a polygraph examiner for the Bureau. So this time, we're going to look at the same case, but we're going to look at it from your eyes as a negotiator. I guess I'm going to need you to give us, and I don't know how you're going to able to do this. I'm giving you an almost impossible task, but I'm going to ask you to give us just a really quick summary of what happened at the Boston Marathon and then bring us to the point where negotiators are asked to become involved. Can you do that?
I'll give it my best shot, Jerry. And thank you. I do want to recognize the literally thousands of law enforcement professionals, all the men and women, agents, analysts that worked this case from beginning to end. And as you explained, I'm only going to talk about kind of a microcosm, the day before his capture and then the night of his capture. So that's just really my portion there, the capture and negotiations. I do like to mention, I don't like to give these bombers any more credit. They've received far more media attention than I care. And there's a great Latin phrase called damnatio memoria, which literally means condemnation of memory, indicating a person is to be excluded from official accounts. It bothers me to give these killers any more notoriety. For example, that Rolling Stone, they did a picture of him on the front cover of Rolling Stone and gave him almost a glowing article, in my opinion. So I will just be referring to them as the older brother and the younger brother, the bombers, as we proceed through this account.
I think that's great. And in my show notes for the two previous episodes that I did on the Boston Marathon, I made sure not to include their photos. I did have their names because I also include news reports, but I did not use their photos because, yeah, we don't need to glorify them.
Totally agree, Jerry. And I'll just talk a few kind of key themes as I tell this story from my perspective. Is one, being prepared. I'll talk about those actions that me and my colleague took to be ready for this potential face-to-face confrontation. And I'll talk about the value that negotiators added throughout this process, synchronizing those efforts, just like we did in Alabama with the boring the bunker case, working together to resolve critical incidents. And then performing under pressure. There was a lot of pressure here. And kind of the uniqueness of this case, too, kind of the first social media, almost frenzy with information flow to and from the police and the FBI to the public and back and forth. Starting off real quick, we all know the two bombs went off on Monday, April 15th, 2013, at the finish line of Boston Marathon bombing. A horrific 4 casualties, 200 plus injured, truly an attack on our nation's soul. Only thing in my mind close to it was the Twin Towers being bombed on 9/11. So the first 3 or 4 days, the FBI and Boston Police and Massachusetts State Police are just intaking massive amounts of social media because we had no suspects initially. Later, it turns out the subjects followed a normal routine, right? Within an hour after the deadly attack, one of them is buying milk. They went to dinner with a friend. They went to the gym at the college. They went to class the next day. Just kind of remarkable, nonplussed behavior exhibited by these two murderous individuals after the bombing. So after 3 days of just a voluminous amount of intake of digital photographs and videos, some incredible analysts in the Bureau had some pictures of the bombers. And then this is one of the kind of the issues that occurred during the marathon bombing is you had some big departments and I'll say big egos, right? The FBI is the lead agency on a domestic terrorism case, although I'm not sure that was ever made clear totally to our partners and the Massachusetts State Police, the Boston Police Department. As you know, the Bureau strives to work collaboratively with our partners, but there needs to be one key leader in my mind, and the Bureau could have done a better job in this case. The photos being released is a perfect example. I understand there were some delays and back and forth between Boston and headquarters over the pros and cons of releasing the photos, although they ended up being leaked. So the Bureau lost all control there. Our partners leaked the photos. So the first kind of significant issue erupts there. But now we've released the photos, and one of the things the negotiators assessed we're not saying the pros and cons of releasing it, but just to inform the decision makers, is that we will spur them to action when the individuals see the pictures of themselves that they're wanted all over the news. So before, they were kind of hiding in plain sight, doing whatever they wanted to do. Now it was going to force them to take action. And that, again, would work to our benefit, potentially, if they were seen leaving. But that social media aspect, I just think is very interesting. The New York Times wrote a great article. They said it's America's first fully interactive national tragedy of the social media age. You think about it, immediate information was provided with access to all via Twitter and social media for the public to be actively involved in the story, and also as participating members. They were able to help identify and hunt for the suspected terrorists. Kind of very interesting dynamic, which really changed the nature of these large-scale tragedies.
You said it before, this was 10 years ago, April 15th, 2013. Yeah, you don't think about that normally when you're looking back, but the difference that social media makes in an investigation today certainly wasn't at the same level 10 years ago, but it sounds like it had an impact.
Tremendously. Well, what it's done, right, good and bad. Good, it informs the public, potentially helps save lives or keeps people out of area. But on the flip side, right, now you have really incredible pressure. It's ratcheted up pressure on law enforcement and decision makers, leaders to take action and show results. Because now you have a public which is very impatient, I'll say, especially when we had 2 bombs go off in a large city in the United States. And after 3 days, the public knew nothing, right? We had no suspects. We had no information coming out. The public with the social media demands answers and investigative updates. So it has definitely changed the landscape of how we operate. So getting back to that Thursday, then April 18th, they released the photos. And sure enough, it does drive the subjects to flee. They first go to get additional weapons. They realize they only have 1 pistol. They want another pistol. So they ambush MIT police officer Sean Collier in his vehicle, and they shoot him at distance the medical examiner later said was about 12 to 18 inches. So Officer Collier, unfortunately, never had a chance. Once they shoot him, they reach in to the vehicle to try to take his pistol. However, due to the locking mechanism on his holster, the retention, they did not know how to deactivate it and release it. So thankfully, they ended up not getting his weapon out. At the very end, I'll tell you, we did get Officer Collier's handcuffs and use them, which I will wait till we get to that point in the story. And this is Thursday, and they carjack an engineering student, Dun Meng, in his Mercedes SUV, asked him if he could get him to New York. The younger brother was interesting enough, concerned about connecting his iPhone to play music through the car because he was worried about being tracked. The student testified they stopped for gas. The older brother goes outside to the ATM, and then he saw a brief moment to escape, and he opened the door of the car and fled. The younger brother tried to grab him, but he was not successful. And thankfully, that individual escaped, ran across the street, and he telephoned 911 saying the bombers are stolen in my car. And remarkable enough, this engineering student, he knew like the GPS tracking code for his Mercedes. I don't know about you, Jerry, but I couldn't tell you the GPS code from any of my cars or house or any number like that off the top of my head, but he knew it.
Well, I didn't even know we all had one.
Right. Well, not all cars have them, but his Mercedes did. And again, he knew that number, which tremendously aided police. So they track that vehicle into Watertown. It actually veers into Friday morning. So it's 12:45 Friday morning in Watertown. And the police try to pull over the Mercedes SUV, which belonged to the engineering student. The brothers ferociously battled back. They shot at the police. They launched improvised explosive devices. They threw more pressure cooker bombs at the police. The older brother ends up running out of ammunition. He's handcuffed in the street. Then the younger brother jumps into their SUV to drive away. And what does he do? He runs over his older brother. We have now a violent confrontation when faced with police.
Now you have one brother, the older brother, who is deceased, ironically, at the car wheel of the younger brother. Now you have the younger brother fleeing.
Yeah, talk about the reversal of fortunes. I'll explain later why I think this. I believe he knew he hit his brother in that car, but he was not sure of the severity of it. Up to this point, we'd had the pictures of the bombers, and now there's a backpack found at that scene in Watertown of the shootout. And inside the backpack, we have a resume for the younger brother, which has his name, address, phone number. Before we had their pictures, now we know exactly who they are. So that Friday morning now, this is the day of the capture. The governor issues an extraordinary shelter-in-place order for all Boston residents. Tensions were extremely high. Even the storied Boston bars were closed. It was like a ghost town. I remember driving the streets. Boston, extremely populated city, but no one's walking their dog, no one's driving their cars. The place was vacant and empty, and especially after this shelter-in-place order Friday morning. Despite the slim chances of being used, my unit, the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit, deployed 4 members to Boston to accompany the FBI Hostage Rescue Team, our national level asset. The Hostage Rescue Team out of Quantico, CNU, is co-located with them, so we flew up with them. My partners, Vince and Mark, were with me, and then Mark Thundercloud, another CNU negotiator, was deployed with a separate HRT unit, and they actually went to New Bedford on a lead. The phone there linked to the younger brother had pinged at student housing there, but ended up not being the subject.
You mentioned Mark Thundercloud, and I actually had an opportunity to interview him on FBI Retired Case File Review. So I want people to know that if they're interested in learning more about negotiations and other situations where you're used, they can listen to Mark on episode 137.
I just want to plug Mark Thundercloud also. First off, he has one of the greatest names of an FBI agent in history.
That's the truth.
I love Mark Thundercloud's name, and important than that, he is just a fantastic individual. I partnered with him on several negotiations. He and my mentor, Vince Delfonso, are both legends in the negotiation community, and I wouldn't have either of these two successes if I hadn't worked extensively with Vince and Mark.
Well, go Mark, and again, I'll have a link to his episode in your show notes so people can learn more about Mark themselves. Now, you're saying that Mark and another member of your team went someplace else. It was you and a partner who stayed in the area where all this confrontation had occurred.
Correct. So that was Watertown. So I stayed at Watertown, and actually Mark, a different Mark, and Vince were flying to join me. Meanwhile, Thundercloud went with a separate HRT unit. There's 3 different units, and he went to New Bedford with one. I was just kind of standing by, coordinating things at Watertown. It was a big command post for law enforcement. Thousands of law enforcement were there. All the mobile command posts were set up there in the Arsenal Mall parking lot. So we assessed the behaviors, right, what negotiators do to provide decision makers information. We assessed a peaceful resolution to be unlikely. Our assessment of the subject was that they both had engaged in highly destructive behavior. They'd murdered the MIT police officer. They conducted a risky carjacking and a kidnapping of the engineering student. And then they had extremely violent confrontation with police when confronted at Watertown. When the one younger brother had escaped, no one thought he would surrender. However, I mentioned earlier in the podcast the theme of preparation. Even though no one thought there was a chance of it, we prepared at CNU. So the local FBI crisis negotiation team, who are the ones, as you know, attached to that FBI field office in Boston, they were interviewing some of the family members of the bombers who were there in the area to just gather information, what we could about the bombers. And they were also accompanying that local SWAT team going from site to site. So what we're doing that Friday is assessing potential third-party intermediaries. And if you remember, talked about briefly on our previous podcast, those people have a pre-existing relationship with an individual or a subject who could possibly help law enforcement. The question is, can law enforcement use them to maybe leverage their relationship to be able to influence the subject to cooperate with us? We start looking at the pool of potential TPI candidates, and we see several people on the media now that they're identified by name. And there was an uncle who was interviewed, and he called them losers. He was very disappointed, said they're not Americans, and he was truly disgusted by them. And actually, we have a clip I sent to you if you want to play that. The reason for the clip is to give a little flavor of what this is his own family talking about the bomber. And as we're looking at that, the uncle is not one we're going to use as a TPI.
That family for a number of years. Pardon me?
Did they live here?
No, they never lived here. They never lived here.
When's the last time you saw them?
Last time I saw them was 2006. December 2005.
Did you ever know them to have any ill will towards the United States?
No. I never knew it. Even if I had a guess or something, I would just submit them myself.
What do you think provoked this?
Being losers, hatred to those who were able to settle themselves. These are the only reasons I can imagine of. Anything else to do with religion, with Islam, it's a fraud, it's a fake.
Did they have any military training at all?
No, as much again. I've seen them when they were kids.
And any experience with guns or?
I don't know. We've seen them only in 2005. Huh?
By what has unfolded in
Of course, we're ashamed. Yes, we're ashamed. They're children of my brother,
Did one of them
who
call
had
last-
little influence of them, honestly, as much as I know. Again, the only, I say what I think was behind it, being losers, not being able to settle themselves. Grew up, as I said, me, myself, and this family had nothing to do with them for a long, long time.
How do you feel about you say to Johar right now he is still
I say, Johar, if you're alive, turn yourself in and ask for forgiveness from the victims, from the injured, and from those who left. Ask forgiveness from these people. We're not requiring forgiveness in this family. He put a shame. He put a shame on the in our family, Tsarnaev's family. He put a shame on the entire Chechen ethnicity. Because everyone now names, they play with word Chechen. So they put that shame on the entire ethnicity. So that's what I would say. Turn yourself in. And whatever one, put yourself at the discretion of those who are here. So that's what I would say.
They're being kind of crucified in the media, definitely deservedly so. However, we're looking for someone who has a positive relationship with them, right? There was one individual, again, families, 3 or 4 people from the family were speaking negatively. And then I saw his wrestling coach from high school, Peter Payak, who spoke positively about the younger bomber.
My son called me at 5:30 in the morning. He said, "Dad, it's Johar." And I said, "What?" He says, "That's Johar." And I just started crying. That wasn't the Johar that I knew. It's a different Johar. The Johar that I knew wasn't throwing sticks of dynamite. He was trying to win a wrestling match. Something changed him, but it's not like they said, it's not like changing the channel. It's like throwing the TV out the window. Honestly, I can't imagine what happened. He was respected so much that he was named the captain of the team. Johar that I knew, he wasn't extreme in any way. He said, "Yeah, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not really a Muslim." He talked like that. He came to wrestle with us in January. He appeared to be exactly the same. I wanted to say that as wrestling coaches, we try to instill the quality of leadership, the quality of completing a task. I honestly think we did what we were supposed to do. People say he's influenced by his brother. But when you're influenced by your brother, usually listen to some type of music your brother plays, or you wear different types of clothes. Can't even watch the TV now with all the pictures now that I know it's Johar.
It was really almost enlightening. He was revealing how he was elected captain of the wrestling team for 2 years and that everyone had looked up to him. He was a good kid. Obviously, you're elected a captain. Your peers like you and respect you. So I immediately tried to get in contact with Mr. Payak, again, because of that positive relationship that he'd had with the bomber. And maybe he had some information that may be able to help me later if I was ever face-to-face negotiating with a younger brother. So I called up the coach, introduced myself, and we spoke for over an hour on the phone. This is that Friday. And I asked him, could you come in tonight so we could talk face-to-face more? And we had an appointment, I think 6 or 7 o'clock that night for him to come in. However, what happens then, this is kind of the key part. The shelter-in-place order is lifted by the governor about 6 p.m. So Mr. Henneberry goes outside to inspect his boat, and he notices the boat cover is ripped in places. Those white tarps, people cover their boats to winterize them, keep out the weather. So he looks inside where it's ripped, he peeks in there, and he sees someone in there, he sees some blood. He calls 911. And this is when kind of the chaos erupts, Jerry, because 400 different law enforcement officers from various departments self-deploy because that 911 call goes out. And this is one of the big problems in large incidents is if you do not have unified command and control, then this is what's going to happen. There were an alphabet soup agency of responding officers, and there's a clip, if you want to play from YouTube, just seconds or so, you can hear the fusillade of fire from those first wave of responding officers at Franklin Street.
And who is doing the firing? Who's shooting?
Hundreds of officers. Jerry, there was roughly 400 law enforcement officers there. I'm not sure what the exact count was. I know it was over 100 rounds were fired, and it was from so many different agencies, so many different weapons. I still think to this day we haven't identified every round from each shooter. Maybe we have, but it was just utter chaos and, again, a lack of unified command and control. One officer thought he or she saw something which necessitated a deadly force response. And then that kind of trigger reaction of all the other officers erupted into that massive amount of shooting. And I was about a quarter mile away in that Arsenal Mall parking lot, and I heard it. And I haven't heard that much fire since my deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq in combat operations. Like here, we're outside of Boston suburb, and I just heard hundreds of rounds being fired. It definitely jolted all of us. And I remember my initial thoughts were, at least hopefully it's over. Hopefully they got the subject.
I had to stop
Go.
you for a minute.
Please.
In hearing about this, and I've never heard it explained that way before, and maybe that's to continue positive perception of the response. Obviously, this was a mistake that was made initially, but it's just surprising that no one in the neighborhood was hurt or injured.
It's really remarkable. Law enforcement was going door to door searching for people, and they did start to clear those homes out. But yeah, the fact the neighbor wasn't hurt or injured is remarkable. And each officer is well-intentioned. However, herein lies the problem, right? You have 400 officers from, I'll say 25 different departments, maybe even more, without a single unified clear chain of command or command and control. And then you have fields of fire, which are not clearly aligned, fields of fire, which maybe have impact zones where other people are located. If the perimeter is not a rock solid perimeter, as your listeners will know, you could have people pointing guns at each other on the perimeter. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Now, I do have a photo of the boat. I saw it at the FBI Experience, the museum at FBI headquarters. So I will include a photo in this episode's show notes so that people can get an understanding of the bullet holes that are around the hull of that boat. And it will really give you a pause when you see the amount of holes in the boat.
Right. Well, as you know, Jerry, law enforcement officers are responsible for each and every round they fire. Each time they press that trigger, they should be shooting at not just a human silhouette, but something very specific and small, ideally like the center mass or the chest, to ensure a hit. Here, unfortunately, they didn't just miss that human silhouette. Some rounds missed the boat. There were rounds in the back of the house and the garage, Jerry, behind it. Not a good day for marksmanship, law enforcement that day.
I do want to stress that the response of law enforcement during this period of time was phenomenal. Very, very proud of the response of law enforcement. But this is a case review, so we need to acknowledge when mistakes are made. And that type of firepower being released on one small area by so many, when you look back on it, is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Right. And I'm the biggest proponent and promoter of law enforcement. I've dedicated 24 years of my life and saw some extraordinary teamwork, fantastic men and women in law enforcement. But yes, to your point, we have to have honest after action reviews. We did in the Army all the time, and I did them in the FBI. And one of the first things you do is you acknowledge what could have done better. So we're not trying to pin blame per se, but we're trying to learn from the past so we don't repeat it again in the future. Yeah, the nation was on edge, law enforcement was on edge, and I was there too. I know how tense-filled the atmosphere was, and yeah, that's why I share this so that we can learn and hopefully improve upon it. You mentioned the boat. I will tell you that it's called the Slipaway 2. There's actually a small portion of the FBI museum dedicated to the capture of the Boston Marathon bomber. So yeah, I've got a good picture of me next to the Slipaway 2, and if you happen to go to the museum in the future, you can see it. Yeah, so the Slipaway 2 is where the subject is in the backyard in Watertown. And finally, one of the Boston superintendents, William Evans, gets control, at least to stop the firing. And he says, hold your fire, hold your fire. So they're able to stop the shooting. There was a report of tear gas being deployed, but that didn't get a response either from the subject. The Massachusetts State Police, MSP, had one of those big Bearcats, an imposing armored vehicle, protects the officers inside. So they drove that up to the boat and had an arm on the front of it, and they tried to dislodge him. So they tried to lift up with that arm to flip the boat over, but the boat trailer prevented that. So they were not able to flip it over, but they did tear open a big gap in that white tarp of the boat, get a bigger hole into there to gain visibility into the vessel. And then the troopers inside grabbed the bullhorn with a big loudspeaker in the front of that vehicle, and they said, come out, commanding the bomber, but to no avail. After all that law enforcement pressure, the bomber was still non-responsive. Every attempt failed to get him off the boat. Back to the Arsenal Mall in Watertown, we hear the gunfire. I think it's probably resolved, but then I glance over, it's a big parking lot. I see one of my HRT, the planning officers, run from the command post to our senior team leader. the one in charge of the HRT assault team. And he runs over to him, and I see him talking back and forth, and I realize, hey, something is up. So I run over there 50 yards and say, hey, what's going on? Oh, they found him in a boat, and they're sending HRT to take over, to take charge, and we're heading out. I asked the team leader, I said, hey, can I come with you? And he said, well, okay. Talking about being proactive. I'm the one that suggested, right? Hey, you should bring negotiators with you. In the heat of the moment with gunfire, I understand negotiators weren't first and foremost on their minds, but always I encourage the negotiators out there, find a way to get yourself to at least be involved in the plan and be there just in case you're needed. So after I had offered us to be there, he said, sure, hop in the last vehicle. So hop in the vehicle and we drove only a quarter mile away, but it takes us 5 or so minutes because so many roadblocks and we have to weave around the perimeter position. First thing he does, just a truly tremendous job, that HRT senior team leader was handed a sandwich and he masterfully took charge of the scene. And I don't say that lightly. Without ego, but yet with confidence, he took command, established himself as the leader, repositioned units, moved HRT snipers into the inner perimeter, flexed the perimeter, moved some personnel out of positions which were not ideal. The first thing the FBI did, and again through that HRT team leader, was instilled order into the chaos. It's a great job by him doing that. And then I was just kind of standing by him off to the side, not doing anything as we first arrived. And it was just incredible, right? An alphabet soup. As I mentioned, agencies, I saw DEA. This is the first time FBI agents arrived, was HRT. There were Massachusetts State Police, the Watertown Police. I saw IRS agents. I saw a Department of State armed agent. And I thought to myself, what is Department of State armed agent doing here in Watertown? But I didn't stop to talk to him. I just noted it mentally. Well, that's interesting. And we are there, and the senior team leader says, let's try to deploy flashbangs into the boat. And flashbangs are those non-lethal concussion devices that emit a massive flash and like 180 decibels of noise to distract, disorient, and in this case, hopefully dislodge the subject from the boat. These are the large 40 millimeter flashbangs that are launched from a grenade launcher, essentially only for military and law enforcement use. That's probably a good point to play this video, or the FLIR video, for the helicopters with a forward-looking infrared radar. FLIR, Massachusetts State Police helicopters overhead, and they are observing from above and gave some great intel on the subject location. They were flying overhead, capturing this scene, this chaotic scene of the bomber in the boat. And you can hear the pilots talking of that clip that I sent you, Jerry.
So they have any Corey, can you tell us if there's still a fire on the boat? That'll be a negative for our safety, sir. Tier 3, another flashbang, negative on movement, negative movement. You received negative on movement. Flashbangs are for the ship, a good distance from our suspect. HRT would like one more pass if you can do it. Yeah, we'll go ahead, we're going to have to get substantial distance though. We're set up for one more pass of the night sun. Your pleasure on that, the CP for the colonel wants to share. We have movement. Arms moving.
We just talked about a volley of shots being fired at this boat. The younger brother, you would assume, is deceased.
Exactly. That was my first thought, because there's so much emotion. And think of that firepower. It was a tsunami of lethal force lodged at him in that boat. Hundreds of rounds, just deafening those rounds. Then he's yelled at by the loudspeaker. He's tried to tip over the boat. Now he's had those flashbangs in there. I can't imagine a more kind of unnerving, just head-rattling situation for him in the boat, and also for us on the outside, because we knew that they previously had lots of improvised explosive devices. So we were under the initial assumption he has IEDs and weapons on that boat that he would use at law enforcement, because we saw what previously he did when confronted by law enforcement. He and his brother fought it out with us. So tensions could not be any higher among both parties, right? The subject and law enforcement and FBI headquarters and the nation, because there were news crews, CNN, and I can't think of the other news group. They saw the massive law enforcement response, so they started airing videos from outside the scene, of course, telling about this massive law enforcement confrontation and all these shots fired. So the public knew something really, really big was happening. The pressure was overwhelming. So as you know, Jerry, and all the law enforcement officers listening, there's a use of force triangle, which law enforcement uses, and it goes up the triangle, like escalation. You can go back down the triangle to de-escalate, which is ideal in use of force. So like the very bottom of the triangle is just mere physical presence. Law enforcement officer being on scene, that is a level of force, just them being present. Above the presence would be verbal commands. Now we are issuing instructions right through our mouth to a subject to comply. And if that is still not successful, we would go up the triangle of force and maybe have to use some non-lethal weapons, maybe a baton, maybe pepper spray, again, to gain compliance. And you work your way up if you have to. At the very top of this deadly force pyramid is deadly force. And that'll be shooting rounds. And almost every law enforcement incident I've been in, hundreds of arrests, you work your way up from the bottom and go to the top. Well, in this case, when HRT and my unit, the crisis negotiation unit, arrived, it was a reverse escalation of force. The subject had already faced lethal force. He'd already faced the non-lethal concussion devices. He'd already faced words, and certainly he'd already faced our presence. So now we were almost starting from scratch, like going up and already down again. So very challenging position from which to even start from if you're a law enforcement officer responding. After the flashbangs result in no response from the subject, we're all just kind of, not for too long, but a few seconds, kind of scratching our heads, at least I was, thinking, boy, what to do next? And then a call came down from headquarters from SIOC, the FBI Strategic Information Operations Center, where headquarters runs and operates crises like these and issues instructions. So word comes from SIOC, try to negotiate. So I'm around the corner from the senior team leader, and he calls on the radio, Kyle, you're up. I thought, wow.
Uh-oh.
This is really kind of startling to me, right? I'm there, and I'd asked to be there for just this circumstance. I'd prepared for it.
Talk about your preparation, because I know that you talked to the coach. What other things had you done to prepare just in case you had an opportunity to negotiate with this younger brother?
Well, the other preparation, and this was all of my CNU colleagues as well doing it, is we were gathering as much information and intelligence as we could about the brothers. We wanted to know any and everything we could about them. The more that CNU knows about an individual, the more they can craft an appropriate negotiation strategy. We were still in the process of culling together all that data, and I had some pretty intimate details from Coach Payak, which definitely armed me with some valuable tidbits to share. And I did have some insight. I knew he was the younger brother, possibly following his older brother and this week-long carnage that they dispensed there in Boston. So I thought he was a little bit more of a follower. So just kind of behavioral assessment we had gone over in our mind, but I hadn't prepared to actually start talking. Even myself, I thought it was such a low likelihood, the negotiation taking place. I took it seriously, the preparation, but I also didn't think it would ever happen, if that makes sense.
Definitely. It's all about being prepared.
I was a Boy Scout, and it's a Boy Scout motto, be prepared. Tried to practice that all my life. One of my favorite lines at Quantico, new agent training, is treat everyone with respect, but be prepared to kill them if things go awry.
I forgot that one, yeah.
As I mentioned, right, CNU was tasked to start at the bottom of the force continuum after we'd already been at the top and all those attempts had failed. So we're going to try to use words to persuade a terrorist into surrendering peacefully after he'd just been shot upon. I climbed up the stairs in the house actually next to David Hendenberry's. I climbed up the second story. I found the window which looked down upon the boat. So I'm only like 20 feet away or so, and I'm looking down on the boat. I just opened the window, and my partners had not been able to make it yet. Vince and Mark, they got separated on the drive over to the crisis site. So now it's just me. Normally you always have a coach with you. So that's the other thing which was unnerving. It's Kyle solo here, right? And guess what? 400 of my new colleagues and FBI headquarters and the FBI director and probably a bunch of other key leaders are going to listen to my every word. And they'll second guess probably every word.
Be honest, were you thinking about that at the time, or was that something afterwards that you thought about?
At the time, I did think there's lots of people listening to my words, but that's all. I didn't actually calculate it or mentally draft it out as I just said, but I definitely thought, man, everyone's going to be listening to me. Who at least is here on scene.
But once you started, were you still thinking about?
No.
Were you second guessing yourself because of what your colleagues or peers might be thinking? Or were you laser focused on what you were saying and doing?
Great question. And the answer is no. Once I started talking, that all went out. And it was only that brief thought as I was walking up the stairs, like a lot of people are going to be listening. But no, once I started, it was, I don't even say I compartmentalized it because I didn't think of it again. So it did not affect my performance because I kind of didn't allow it to, right? I didn't start ruminating, I hope I'm saying the right thing here, or I hope I don't say the wrong thing. That didn't even enter my mind once I started talking.
That's what I thought. A true professional.
Good question. So I was so close that I didn't even need a bullhorn, but I was within small arms range. Well, most all of us were there if he did open up on us. But I was positioning myself best I could below the window. It was a typical bedroom window of a child, like 2-3 feet off the ground. So I just opened the window and tried to put as much of my body below it, just my head above it, so my voice would project out. And it would seem more natural, too, my voice that way. I just cupped my hands around my mouth and said, "This is Kyle. I'm with the police. I'm here to talk to you." Your classic negotiator introduction, first name, your affiliation, and your purpose. And I said that. So I'm just here to talk with you. Because our goal at this point is just to establish communications with the subject. So for 10 minutes, I'm talking, Jerry. Think of a one-way dialogue where you have no one responding. Very difficult to have a one-way conversation.
And keep it going.
Yes, because everybody wants something like a tangible acknowledgement or a response from him, right? Because is he dead? Are we just wasting our time here? Or is he preparing to have one last hurrah and try to kill us? And we learn this in training, right? Just because a person doesn't respond doesn't mean they're not listening. I tried to convey reassuring and non-threatening statements and create a stable environment for communications. And it was eerily silent, right, when I would stop talking. At about 5 minutes in, I look, and I had put my phone on vibrate, which is smart, but my phone starts vibrating. And I thought, man, this is really not a good time. But I look, and it's Vince, my partner. And I think to myself, what does Vince want? Like, this really is not a good time. So I answer it, and he says, "Hey, Kyle, it's Vince. Remember to vary your language. You don't want to sound like a parrot when you're talking to someone, especially this one-way dialogue. It's easy to repeat yourself." "Okay, thanks, Vince. Good point." I hung up on him, and I went back to varying my language to the bomber.
Well, wait a minute. Here was your opportunity to have a coach. You were just saying that you didn't have a coach, which is normal. And you hang up on him?
Yeah, it gets better, Jerry. It gets better. He calls me back 2 minutes later and gives me another suggestion. "Hey, Kyle," and I forget what the suggestion was, but it was a good suggestion. And I hang up on him again. I was so laser focused, your words, I was too myopic, thinking singularly of my role and my discussions, trying to elicit a response from the bomber. Vince calls the third time, and you're going to love this. "Kyle, don't hang up, fool. I'm going to be your coach."
Now, I swear that I did not know that.
Really?
But I'm thinking, like, why wouldn't you want him to stay on the phone with you?
Well, again, that's because you're a good investigator and you're good thinking on your feet. And I didn't know. Like, I was definitely too singularly focused on myself, and it didn't pop. Like, it's so obvious, right? And you picked right up on it. Just fascinating. As I look back, I obviously should have kept it open from the first call.
Right. I think for most of us, what we and again, that's because you were trained and you were relying on that experience and that training. But the rest of us would have been thinking like, "Oh, good, somebody here to help me."
Well, it's such a good adaptive play by Vince, and he's one of the most creative negotiators I've ever worked with, one of the best in the world. And him thinking of that phone, which I'd never practiced that before in training. It seems so logical now, right? It's not like it's earth shattering, but it's just a good idea on the fly Vince had, because he didn't know. Again, it's very chaotic outside with all the perimeter units and who's where. So he just came up with that perfect solution. "Hey, I'm just going to talk you through the phone and be your coach." And I said, "Yep, got it. Sorry." So I start speaking to the bomber, right? I'm speaking with respect. Even though he killed the 2 innocent women and the children and injured hundreds more, we need to know where there are additional bombs or terror cells out there. When you're negotiating, you're building rapport. You're not judging. You're not lashing out. And you're not condoning anyone's actions either. You're just trying to establish, at this point, just a dialogue with the individual.
Okay, and you just said something that I had to stop you for a minute because I'm sure there are people listening who are saying, "Why bother? Why are you negotiating to get him out? Why do we need him?" I mean, you hear that old Western saying, "Wanted dead or alive." What is this whole purpose of negotiating? Just get him. You got enough firepower and enough people. Just take him out.
It's fascinating. I've posted some brief snippets of the Boston Marathon bombing capture on LinkedIn. And obviously, I can't go the full story there. But even on there, I talk about the power of negotiation, the value of negotiation. And there's people on LinkedIn is a professional website, right? And even people on there respond, "Why didn't you just kill the guy? He deserved to die." Believe me, I get it. I would love to see him receive the death penalty and no longer be a part of society since he violated so many covenants of our society. I did not want him to live per se. I wanted information out of him. We didn't know at that time. The nation was on edge, Jerry. You remember it. Just similar to like the nightmare in DC when people are being shot at. You don't know how many individuals are involved. If there was just one other person or one other set of 2 people, look how much damage and destruction these 2 brothers wreaked on the greater Boston area. What if they had 2 cousins in New York City about to unleash the same thing in Times Square? It's just fascinating to me. Again, it's not a morality issue. I don't care if the guy lives or dies later, but I want to know the information. So it's foolhardy to me, especially in a contained situation like this, where there's no other hostages. It's just him on the boat and law enforcement understands the risks. Every one of us there at the scene signed up for it, and I don't mind putting my life at risk with my brothers and sisters to try to save others' lives. And to not try to negotiate in order to gain information is foolhardy. I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, I think there's a lot of people listening who are saying, aha, something that they never considered before.
Hopefully. So after 10 minutes of one-way dialogue, and I kept saying 2 or 3 phrases, if you can't speak, but if you can hear me and you can't talk back, just bang on the bottom of the boat or just wave the tarp. I was worried he may be shot somewhere. Maybe he couldn't speak, but if he could give another sound back to me to convey that he was listening, then that would be two-way communication. Finally, after 10 of the longest minutes probably of my life, he finally groaned. He responded when I said, if you can hear my voice, please respond. And he groaned and kind of hit the boat. Really a bingo moment there, right? Because think all those previous law enforcement efforts to establish communications and dislodge him from the boat had failed. And yet my words were able to establish two-way communications with no weapons, no threats. So now we're on to step 2, right, of negotiation kind of 101 is build rapport and gain compliance. And we build rapport by demonstrating empathy. So I said, hey, I'm sure you're scared, you're probably hurt, you're confused in the boat, trying to put myself in his position. Demonstrating empathy is tough because, again, you're not agreeing or condoning with his actions, but you're trying to see things from his or her perspective. So that's what I'm trying to do, demonstrate empathy, but I'm at least trying to understand his position. Trying to persuade him, right, the wounded subject to leave any weapons or IEDs he may have in the boat and exit the craft peacefully without additional violence. He also finally says his first word, water. And I said, in my mind, I thought, fantastic. This is ideal. When a subject wants something from law enforcement, then we can usually provide it, especially water. And I said, we have tons of water, ice cold water out here, but you have to come off the boat to get it. We have at least an allurement item, something he knows, right? He's thirsty on the boat. And we're looking for how can we leverage, right, my previous conversations with the wrestling coach. I'm trying to wait for a good moment to kind of interject that in. So I did say to him, hey, I was a wrestler in high school also. Trying to lower tension, build a little trust. Said, hey, there's people that want to see you on the outside. They want to see you alive. And I say, come out on your own terms. Come out on your own terms. Right, I'm trying to give him some semblance of control, right? Negotiations, you want the individual to choose, hopefully, the peaceful way out. They always have a choice, and now I'm just kind of verbalizing that choice for him. Because if he stays on the boat, I told him, if you stay on the boat, you're going to die on the boat. And my coach had a great point. This is maybe now 25 or 30 minutes into the negotiation. I'd compared and contrasted also the conditions inside the boat. I said, inside the boat, you're all alone. You got no food. You got no water. You're hurt. You need medical care. And on the boat is death. You come off the boat, you have life. You have people that love you. You have ice cold water. We have food. We have medical care. So in his mind, I really want him to look at those two options, what's on the boat and what's outside the boat.
I don't know if this is something that you can speak about, but that desire for survival has to be different for different people. Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking you've done this horrible thing, the bombing and the death and the people that have died at your hands, and you're laying in that boat and you're injured, and you know that if you stay there, you're going to die. Some people would say, yeah, that's what I want. That's the perfect ending for me now is to die. But you were able to trigger or to ignite this need for him to survive. I'm sure there's a lot of us, including me, that are wondering why he wanted to live after all of that.
It's a fascinating point, Jerry. And to me, it shows the absolute tremendous, incredible power of words. Because that's all I used was words to him. But I used meaningful words with emotional connections to him. Like I referenced those family members specifically that want to see him. I mentioned his wrestling coach, Peter Payak. So slowly in his mind, he's realizing, hey, this guy knows about me. This guy, Kyle, I'm talking to, he knows my background. Maybe I can trust him and believe him. He's describing this kind of really horrible situation that I'm in now, and he's describing how good it is on the outside. The words helped paint a picture. Everyone has an incredibly strong survival instinct, and thankfully, the words triggered him to want to live, because I don't think he had that before, because he actually scribbled on the side of the boat, kind of a last prayer, and I do think it would have turned out differently had we not been there, Jerry.
There are two ways that you could look at this. You could get him to come out, or you could go in to get him. And I take it at this point, the assessment has been made that he does not have any weapons and that he's injured. The fact that you're still negotiating and that somebody hasn't convinced managers that a tactical response of just going in to get him would not be the easier or the quickest or the fastest thing to do is also amazing.
Jerry, again, just you're spot on because the pressure to resolve this tactically was overwhelming. Just like many civilians, right, wanted him dead, many law enforcement officers, let's be honest, wanted to be the one maybe to end his life and be the kind of hero of the day. But I do have to interject. We did not know he did not have any weapons yet. We're again at the 30-minute point, and we do know, as we're assessing behavior, we did have no new indicators of threat. We had no new violence since we started talking, and he was engaging in longer and longer conversations with me, and we were talking about things outside of the current crisis site. So all those are what we call indicators of progress in negotiation parlance. So we told headquarters, and by the way, they wanted an update every 20 minutes, and thankfully Vince and Mark were handling that, and they were able to relay those positive indicators and push back headquarters on the tactical resolution. The tactical resolution, it's over, right? And so the nation can breathe a sigh of relief, but also the tactical resolution means it's over for the younger brother too, meaning there is no intelligence, there is no information to gather because he's deceased. Because if tactical goes in, he's not coming off alive. So tremendous pressure from headquarters, like I said, to kind of resolve this and be done with it. And this is only 30 minutes in. And my coach, Vince, had a great idea at this point when I was, on that theme of comparing and contrasting the conditions inside the boat with outside the boat. He, on that open line now that I realized he was going to coach me via the phone, he said, "Hey, Kyle, let's take a 3 to 4 minute break and just let him reflect on those words you just said." And I told him that, "Hey, we're going to take a quick break here." And I told him I'm going to talk to my colleague. And we wanted those words to sink in, right? For him to really think that staying on the boat and dying, coming off the boat, and all that he had to live for. So I think that timeout too, and you're asking what those critical things were which led him to want to live, I think that timeout definitely helped also.
I had to break in just to say, this
Sure.
is fascinating.
Thank you. That's what I mean. This is the first time I'm getting so deep into this, by the way. So our assessment is we have indicators of progress. Things are trending in a positive direction, and we're pushing back on this action imperative. In law enforcement and A-type personalities, leaders want to see and want to do things, right? They want to be seen as taking action, being decisive, but yet you don't just take action and be decisive for the sake of being decisive. At least in a crisis, leaders have to ask themselves, what has changed in the crisis to necessitate a change in our approach? Meaning, like, did the guy start shooting at us? Well, then, yeah, that necessitates obviously immediate lethal response. But if the guy's communicating with us and there's no new threats and there's no new violence, well, we should continue down the negotiation path. Don't resist that action imperative of wanting to do something just to resolve something. And that's exactly what negotiators were pushing back on this with the headquarters and tactical. When we come back from the break, this is really another key moment. I said, "Hey, we're not coming on the boat, but we're not going away. If you want to live, you have to come off the boat." And this is the lightning bolt moment. I had known the nickname that his friends called him in wrestling. It was Jahar. And I said, "I know you're hurt and confused, Jahar." And I can't describe it except it was like an electrical jolt, almost a lightning bolt between me and him. Even though I couldn't see his face, I just sensed it because I think he was jolted by the fact that I knew his nickname. Because now we're getting into those intimate personal details that I'd obtained from my interview with Coach Payak that I was leveraging now to show him I knew who he was. So just by me sharing and using his nickname to call him by that, it's like he knew I knew who he was. And it was just really a kind of a fantastic connection moment there. Was I talk about building rapport with subjects. I knew I then had a connection.
And I guess also in his mind now flashes his friends and that life and those moments are all flashing in front of his eyes.
Exactly. Triggering those positive memories. Yeah, it's a really great theme that you've picked up and explored, Jerry, was the how to persuade him to live. And I think you're absolutely right. This was another factor of those positive memories of being the captain of his wrestling team, of his wrestling coach that he looked up to for so many years. And the wrestling coach wanting to see him. And I told him, "Hey, I spoke with your wrestling coach." Think about that. If you were being interviewed or someday and happened to run into someone and they had just spoken with the most influential person in your life about you, wouldn't that really kind of move you or make you inclined to listen to this person?
Absolutely.
Coach Payak was kind of like a mentor and role model when Jahar was on the wrestling team. And this is previously, right? I think he was 1 year out of high school. So he hadn't wrestled or been with Coach for a year. But for 3 years, he was on the wrestling team. And 2 years, he was captain. So he really looked up to and admired Coach Payak. So his words meant a lot to him. So the fact that I was able to, first off, say, hey, I spoke with Coach Payak about you and he wants to see you live. That's a positive image, right, formed in his mind. Those wrestling memories probably came flooding back to him. And then when I invoked his nickname, Jahar, like another lightning bolt of bridge building, rapport building between me and the bomber, which is incredibly beneficial. If I had not done this preparation and my colleagues had done the preparation, we would not have been able to connect with him, I think. That proactive preparation work paid off huge dividends here. And he knew who I was, and he knew that I knew his background. So it was a pivotal moment during the negotiation on the path towards influencing the bomber. That's our eventual goal in the negotiation, right? Influence him to come off the boat. So I continue the themes, right? Comparing, contrasting conditions on the boat. And I non-confrontationally told him, you got to get off the boat. And now we're in like a dialogue. It's a true back and forth. He says, I can't move. I can't move. I said, you got to move. You got to pull yourself, drag yourself, finish the match. Another kind of key moment. I compared this to a wrestling match to him because he knew wrestling match. And I wrestled in high school. So also I'm trying to strengthen that our connection based off our shared mutual wrestling history. And I said, you got to pull yourself off. So he slowly starts dragging himself, and I can hear him and just barely see him. It's like an inch or two at a time. So I can tell he's really drained, that he's exhausted, and it's taken a lot of effort. And I said, it's time to come off. Remarkably, right, what is he doing? He's following my directions, 1 inch or two at a time. So that takes another probably 15 minutes because he goes from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat where the tarp was torn and where he could exit that side of the boat. He makes it all the way to the edge now. Pressure from headquarters and tactical has now been put in abeyance. Now that we have a compliant subject actively moving to exit the boat, dramatic game-changing conditions of the crisis site, which again bought negotiators time because there was pressure on us, right? Negotiators to show results, but now we achieved tremendous results.
What time of the day is this?
This is now about 9 p.m.
So it's dark.
Dark, yep.
Did they bring in lights or anything?
Yes, there were some lights on, so I could see some. It's like your typical backyard lights. We did not have like those massive law enforcement floodlights, but there were some backyard lights on. It was dark, but there was some light. And you can see now, this is one of the more famous pictures. He finally drags himself upright because he was horizontal on the boat before. He drags himself upright. He puts like one hand on the side of the boat. This is just awesome. HRT and CNU, we've brought clarity, we've brought focus, order, and direction throughout this process, instilling order into chaos. Now it's an orderly, safe resolution. So we're focusing on behaviors which would increase the tactical advantage to us while also decreasing the law enforcement risk. So he gets himself up. We're implementing a slow, methodical surrender process, and he lifts his left leg over the side of the boat, and it's very painful. He has to like lift it up. His hands go down to help his leg over the boat. Then he is trying to lift his right one. And he said, I can't. And I said, you've got to finish the match, Jahar, finish the match. And he's badly bleeding, right? I can see he's bruised up. He's got a sweatshirt on. And he said, I can't do it. And he's so physically drained, he actually starts to waver on top of that gunnel on the edge of the boat because he has one leg over now and one leg on the inside. The right leg's still on the inside. This is not good because it could all be an allurement, right? Is he just faking, almost passing out because he wants to lure law enforcement in and then set off an IED inside the boat and try to kill more of us in a trap? That's going through our mind right now. And I said, hey, lift up your sweatshirt so I can see if you have anything underneath. Because I've been in Iraq and Afghanistan, as I told you, I've seen suicide bombers and the horrific results from them. So I want to make sure he had no explosives on his chest. He had none. Thankfully, there are no visible weapons on him. We can see 80% of his body. We just can't see the bottom of his right thigh. That's the only part of his body we can't see if there's weapons. So I did motivate him using my words to display his hands and raise his shirt. He is complying, but now he's precariously balanced on the edge, suddenly like leans forward and is leaning against kind of the window edge of the boat. I said, Jar, stay with me. And he kind of pops back up. I'm worried now he's going to lose consciousness. And if he truly falls unconscious, falls back in the boat, we're back to square one. All these negotiated gains, all this rapport building connection is all for nothing. If he passes out in the boat, I guess we could re-engage if he wakes up later and we wait for him, but I'm not sure what the patience level at this point would be if he fell back in the boat. The HRT team leader is talking to Vince and Mark, discussing this, and our assessment is that he's not faking it. Truly think he doesn't have the energy, and that he said he was shot in that right leg badly, and he couldn't move that right leg over the edge. It's a totally different situation than when we started, right? Because now we have a compliant subject with no visible weapons, posed much less of a threat. So we recommended to the team leader, and they're discussing it, just pull him off the side of the boat, go detain him. So the team leader mulls it over, and he sees the same thing we see, right? The behavior of him almost passing out. One of the most magnanimous gestures I've ever seen in law enforcement, and for sure in a crisis of this magnitude. That senior team leader, he had his HRT personnel right there. HRT had owned the perimeter. CNU had taken it up to this point, resolved it peacefully, and still lowered in the chaos. He had every right to send FBI agents up to pull him off the boat and handcuff him and take him to custody. But did he do that, Jerry? No. This humble, again, magnificent kind of giant of a man grabs 3 guys from one department, 3 guys from another department, Massachusetts State Police, and briefs them quickly, forms them into a 6-person tactical unit and gives them instructions, says, hey, you guys are going to march up. Kyle's going to explain to him what's going on. You guys go up. They'll have a shield up front. You guys get to go pull them off. And guess what? Then a number 2 officer had Sean Collier's handcuffs. So I tell him what's going to go on. I say, hey, these officers are going to come approach from you, and you see the red dots? The red dots, the lasers from the weapons that were trained on him. If you want to live, listen to my voice and my instructions. In negotiations, we try to have positively framed instructions, but also with a reality check. I said, if you follow my instructions, you'll live. If you make a quick movement, we will shoot you. Rarely do you say that in negotiations, we will shoot you, but I said it several times. I wanted to make it very clear to him that if, while they were approaching, he reached for something, he would be shot and it would be over.
I would also think that you said it because of the responsibility level that you felt, that if it was a ruse, if it was a trick, you're negotiating with him to send officers in a dangerous situation. So you want to make sure that he understands that you're not taking that responsibility lightly.
100%, Jerry. And that's one of the main reasons I became a negotiator. Being a former tactical HRT operator, being a former SWAT operator, having gone on hundreds of missions in combat and domestically being shot at, I knew what it was like to risk one's life to go up, put cuffs on someone. One of my goals in every negotiation was to minimize the bad guy's possible advantage and maximize law enforcement's advantage on any arrest operation. I did take that so seriously, as all agents do, but I just think I have a special extra spot in my heart and in my mind because I have gone through that for so many years. So I wanted to be extra careful for my brothers and sisters who would be following on after I had set something up using my words.
We've got to go back to the decision of the HRT team leader to involve the law enforcement partners who are there at the scene, including especially Watertown police who have these handcuffs. It sounds like something that needs to be a plan and sit down and think about it, but it sounds like it was an on-the-spot decision that just came naturally to him to make sure that everyone at the scene was represented in this arrest.
Correct. And this team leader, again, as I mentioned, did more than a magnificent job because he actually arrived Monday of that week. He's exceedingly deferential to the locals who live and work in those areas because that's when HRT deploys anywhere. We know we're in someone's turf and someone's locality. And once we leave, that it's going to go back to their turf mentality. We're just temporary renters almost there. So we truly are sensitive to not stepping on the toes of our local, state, and other federal partners. But we also know that we have some of the best training in the world, and our professionals I would put up against anyone. So he did take command, but without stepping on the toes. And then when the situation is, again, so much lowered risk for all people, for him to, again, on the spot, make that decision to let the locals put on the cuffs and kind of give them the glory. I would not have done that, Jerry, because it just wouldn't have occurred to me. Like, that's why I tip my hat so much to him. I wouldn't try to exclude the state and local partners, but it just would have been logical and natural to continue the operation with HRT personnel putting the cuffs on them. So that's the other reason I just give them all the credit in the world.
Yeah, I agree. It would not have occurred to me. But at that time, HRT and CNU were in charge and on the spot decide to allow others to participate really is unbelievable and something that we definitely should applaud this HRT team leader for.
100%. He's a true hero, devoted his life, one of the most respected men at HRT, not just for this, for many other reasons. Just a wonderful job of allowing kind of them the glory, which the Bureau didn't need. Although, as I mentioned, it would have been nice maybe for any of those folks to mention HRT and CNU's involvement, give credit where credit is due, and appreciate when others do the same.
Now, was that in the documentary?
I only watched like 10 minutes of the documentary on Netflix. It was bothersome to me because the 10 minutes I watched, I was interested in how they portrayed the capture and how the FBI came in and our actions. But there's barely a mention of the resolution. It was like one sentence, and then it was negotiated out. You are quite professional in the FBI. I guess it's a minor respect issue, is that I always give credit to others where credit is due, and I don't seek it. But also, if the Bureau is not getting credit, the FBI, and specifically in this case, HRT and CNU, I don't even hear getting recognized or acknowledged on these other podcasts or documentaries about the resolution. And again, the resolution was all FBI, HRT, and CNU. I'm actually befuddled. Maybe they don't know how to reach out and find those handful of people who were involved, but now those listening do at least. Back to this story, Jerry. Sorry, just that little sidetrack.
No problem. I understand. I say this almost every show now, but the importance of telling the story is because of passing down institutional knowledge. But the other part of that is just helping with the perception, the positive perception of the FBI and law enforcement in general by getting the full story out and showing how things really happened, how they really went down, and giving everybody credit who was involved.
Exactly. And that's why I'm here, Jerry. So again, thank you for doing this. It's just such a remarkable job, and what a great impact you've had on the positive portrayal and accurate portrayal of the Bureau's successes and things we didn't do so well. So again, I commend you for that, and thank you for spreading the word via this podcast. So with the bomber, I'm verbally preparing him for what's going to happen. I don't want him surprised to see them approaching or what they're going to do. I don't tell him they're going to yank him off. I just say they're going to help you off. Because then when they get close, they're behind the shield and he's leaning forward, kind of going in and out of consciousness. But I wanted him to know the consequences of noncompliance, and he knew that. And then they approach, the one guy grabs his hand, yanks him off. They do a quick search and then put Officer Collier's handcuffs on him. What was an extremely volatile situation with a non-compliant subject where lethal force was not effective. Thanks to my words, my coach, my fellow negotiator colleagues, really all over the country, our efforts and HRT efforts, synchronizing those there in Watertown, we lowered the risks and really saved lives. We're able to capture a subject that we could interview later and find out if there were additional bombs or cells. Using just words and actively listening, I was able to connect with the subject, and he followed my directions, and he was taken into custody. One of the most chaotic manhunts in U.S. history, and one of the most incredibly tense standoffs in memory was over, astoundingly without additional bloodshed. And that's why I do like to highlight it was HRT and CNU peaceably resolved one of the biggest manhunts in this nation's history. After he's safely detained, the team leader asked, Kyle, can you ride in the ambulance with him? I said, sure, I'm not doing anything else. And I wasn't, right? So I hop in the back of the ambulance. Then it made sense. I'm the one that had connected with him. He's laying down. He's receiving oxygen. The medic is working on him. He'd been shot numerous times. He was in not good shape at all. Numerous gunshot wounds, like I said. So he grabs my hand because he recognized, I think, my voice. I'd connected with a killer. Think about this. He's fading in and out during the ride. He squeezes my hand and he's trying to talk to me, right? Trying to say something. So I leaned in close to his mouth and he asked me, how's my brother? He did not know that he'd killed his brother. So interesting point I'm at, right? And I've done lots of interviews and lots of interrogations with actually terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I knew that our interrogation unit, the HIG, would be talking to him later. And I thought, man, what is the best way to respond to this right now? Because really, he's in no state to really even be an interview or interrogate. I didn't want to reveal anything either. So in true negotiator fashion, when he asked, how's my brother? I paused, thought for a couple of seconds, and I said, I'll check on him for you. I didn't tell him he was alive or dead. After the short 10-minute ride to Beth Israel Hospital, we drop him off to 2 FBI agents in surgical gowns. I hand off custody to him. I whisper in one of the guy's ears, hey, he's asking about his brother, just so you know, and can use it later. He's now no longer my responsibility. The Boston PD tweeted captured, and then I actually hopped in a ride with a Boston police car departing the scene. After that capture, people flooded out of their houses. Amazing. The eruption of patriotism, of jubilation, of respect for law enforcement was really overwhelming because we came to the first roadblock. They're removing the cones, and there must have been 150 people outside. And they saw our police car, and they saw me in back, but they didn't know who I was or what we had just done. They just knew we were law enforcement officers trying to protect them and keep them safe. And they knew that law enforcement had just captured the Boston Marathon bomber. So they were so happy and jubilant. They came up to our car, and they started shaking it and chanting, USA. USA, USA. It sent chills down my spine, Jerry. The incredible eruption of feelings from a city that had been locked down and terrorized for a week. And now the FBI had reopened all those storied Boston bars.
All right, Kyle, you're being a big, tough guy. It brought chills to me as I'm hearing about it. I had to think that it was more than just chills because you had been in this ultra tense situation. So at what point was it when he was in handcuffs? Was it when you're sitting with him in the ambulance? Is it when this crowd gathers in the street shouting USA? At what point does that tension start to release? And what was really your reaction?
Yeah, it was definitely not until the car ride back. I was still high from the emotions. They didn't start to let down till that car ride back. And then that USA, USA, it did send chills down my spine. And yeah, my tears started flowing down my face. Just the release of all that stress, all that pressure, and seeing that appreciation. I never in my life had like a hero's welcome, and I don't deserve one, but that I felt like was a hero's welcome for all of law enforcement in Greater Boston, and being the recipient of that from so many joyous, happy, cheerful, jubilant is the best word. I've never seen that much emotion. And yeah, it was overwhelming in the car when they were chanting USA and rocking it back and forth. Really an incredible moment I'll never ever forget.
Thank you for sharing that.
Jerry, I always like to mention Crystal Campbell, Martin Richard, Lou Lindsay, and Sean Collier all lost their lives to these two individuals. And also hundreds more were injured. So these horrible people did end some people's lives. Tragically, severely impacted others. So I know people keep them in their mind. And as far as the resolution, the older brother was killed, of course, by his younger brother. And the younger brother was convicted in 2015 of all 30 charges against him, including conspiracy and use of a weapon of mass destruction. However, the First Circuit in 2020 overturned his death sentence and ordered a new penalty phase to decide whether he should be executed, finding the judge did not sufficiently question jurors about their exposure to the news coverage of the bombing. The Supreme Court justices by 6-3 vote agreed with the First Circuit's ruling was wrong, though, and the bomber's lawyers are continuing to appeal his death sentence.
Where is he now?
The younger brother remains behind bars at Florence AdMax, a supermax security prison in Florence, Colorado.
Well, that was a fascinating case review. When we first talked about doing this, I thought to myself, I've had someone on to do a case review about the Boston Marathon 2 times now. Will 3 times be too much? And the answer to that is obviously no. That you were able to give us insight into tactical decisions, the negotiation decisions, and the final resolution that we didn't get in the other 2 case reviews. So thank you so much for being willing to come back again and to share your personal involvement in the Boston Marathon bombing investigation.
Thank you again, Jerry. It was truly a pleasure to share this collective FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit and Hostage Rescue Team success story, along with all the other law enforcement personnel who were there that day. And it's a privilege to share my perspective of these firsthand incidents, which listeners don't get to hear too often. And they didn't get to see in the Netflix documentary, but they got to hear it.
Excellent. Usually at this point, I ask you when and why you joined the FBI, but I have spoken to you before
Yep.
on episode 280. So I'm going to ask those who are interested in when and why you joined the FBI to go back to episode 280 and listen to that. I'm also going to let them have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about your career by going back to that episode. But I would like for you to do 2 things that we've done before, and that is to talk to us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then to give us your last words of wisdom.
Now, one of the things I enjoy doing is first, I'm a guest lecturer at Cornell University, part of their executive leadership development program. I go up there every month or so, talk to different groups. I've developed this interactive case study that I use, and it inserts the participants into the case study. For example, I'll talk them through the first day of the Boy in the Bunker story. I'll pause, and then I'll ask them, okay, now what would you do given these circumstances? I give them 10, 15 minutes. We have discussions. They decide their course of action. Then I tell them what really happened. And then we go through to another break point. And same thing, I pause. So this interactive nature of the crisis and leadership has just been really popular with both corporations and law enforcement. I just did it last week with Michael Warren at Virtual Academy, a crisis leadership exercise as well. And the law enforcement chiefs and supervisors, negotiations and tactical loved it because it was immersed in the case study and they're the ones making decisions. So I love doing this, helping elevate others, teams, leaders, and individuals to be prepared for the future.
If somebody wanted to have you come speak to them or to go through your training, how do they get in touch with you? Do you have a website?
I do have a website, Jerry. ApexRiskConsulting.us is my website, and they can contact me there. That's my consulting firm. Also, I'm on LinkedIn as well. My profile there is public and open to view. So I truly enjoy connecting with others, preferably not terrorists on boats, but other people out there looking to improve their communication skills, their connection skills, or their leadership skills. My spare time is mostly focused on being with my family as well. My 3 sons are doing terrific.
I will make sure to include a link to your website in this episode's show notes.
Awesome. And the last word, I just had a call from a random individual wanting to join the Marine Corps and serve their country in the FBI and possibly HRT. As I alluded to before, I think one of the big reasons for my success, besides my wonderful parents being incredibly supportive, is just a hard work ethic to be prepared. Going back to that Boy Scout motto, in every significant task or challenge, whether it be Eagle Scout, West Point, Airborne or Ranger School in the Army, or FBI Hostage Rescue Team tryouts, I diligently prepared each and every event or item that I could, whether it be an interview preparation. I would practice with my brothers and friends what interview questions I thought they would ask, or a physical event carrying a 30-pound ammo can underneath the water for 25 meters. I would prepare and practice. So when and if those crises occur in people's lives or those challenges arise, that they have the confidence, they've worked hard, prepared, and they're ready to excel when the true test comes.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to jerrywilliams.com and the show notes for this episode, where you'll find a photo of Kyle Vowinkel, plus photos and links to articles about the Boston Marathon bombings and the younger brother's surrender, an image of the use of force triangle, also known as the deadly force pyramid, and more links to other FBI retired case file review shows about the Boston Marathon bombings and episodes about crisis negotiations. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.